have Bitcoin donations up on the website with similar disclaimers about privacy. And this just doesn't go away, right? Libra is now these days claiming that pseudonymous privacy on blockchains is good enough, right? This was just this week. And this is hilarious because it just isn't true, right? It's a long-standingly known result in computer science that pseudonymity is very fragile. It's very easy to link people together and identify what you're doing. And there are a number of academic papers on this, particularly dealing with Bitcoin. And not just are there papers, there are actually companies. The story goes that at some point when which paper was this? Oh yeah, Fistful of Bitcoins, Characterizing Payments Among Men with No Names. Someone was giving a talk on this out in California, and someone in the audience went, well, that's a really good idea, let's make a company out of it. And you got Chainalysis. So there actually are businesses in the business of de-anonymizing cryptocurrencies today, right? This is no longer a theoretical issue. We really know Satoshi has no clothes. There are people out here doing this. And the reason for this is that cryptocurrency, and Bitcoin specifically, is Twitter for your bank account. Any transaction you make is broadcast to the public, to everybody to validate. In fact, that's the entire point of a blockchain, right? You can look at it and you can tell that there's no funny business going on, that you don't have to trust anyone else because you can check it yourself. But that also means that all of the data is public, which means anybody can see what you're doing. Your creepy ex-girlfriend or boyfriend, your business competitors, anybody in the world, right? One of the things that you may have seen recently, which is totally shocking actually to me that it ever would have happened, is a comment from the chair of the House Finance Committee, I think, Maxine Waters, suggesting that the visibility of payments on a blockchain is actually, in fact, a national security issue, right? So this is a US congressman saying on the record that blockchains present a privacy problem. It's precisely for this issue that they broadcast things to everybody, right? Foreign governments included, right? So this is the problem, right? What do we do about it? Well, there are a number of different proposals of varying things to do this. This is not even a comprehensive list. A number of things have been added since. They vary in terms of complexity of cryptography, from the simple all the way up to things that are like an entire PhD thesis worth of work. And they vary from when they came out and their sophistication. So what do you do if you're trying to add privacy to a blockchain? What do you pick? How do you evaluate these things? And the problem is that evaluating cryptocurrency and privacy is hard, right? It's akin to evaluating privacy issues on the internet in 1992 when the only things that are online are websites at CERN, right? The uses simply aren't there now, and so you can't do it empirically, right? Almost all transactions are speculative. We don't really use these things in our daily lives, and researchers also have limitations, right? They don't have access to good data sets, they don't have the amount of funding, and they have ethical issues where they can't do some of the dicier experiments that would really prove that this is a problem. So in order to evaluate this, we need to resort to thought experiments. And these aren't going to give us qualitative answers. They're just going to give us quantitative ones of, well, some of these things are good ideas, some of these things are bad. And in order to do this, the first thing we need to do is understand realistic threats, right? We can't live in this hypothetical world of you're sitting in a court and you just want to be able to say, well, you can't with 100% probability say that it was me, right? And that was the model that Bitcoin operated under for a long time. And as I'll get to later in this talk, it's kind of a laughable model. So we have to think of really what are our threats here, right? And so what are some real-world privacy threats? One is companies analyzing your payment history and using it to do targeted ads. Google has a project to do exactly this, where they map real-world purchases you make at, say, Target or Walmart to ads you have seen online, and then try to do appropriate payments for conversions. Now, Google in particular claims that they're doing this with privacy-preserving MPC, but you can be guaranteed that if Google is doing this, other people are as well, right? And this is a problem, because this is, basically tracking cookies ported from the internet, which we already use them for advertising, into real life, right? Following everything you do. Similarly, we know that the data you have of what you buy and what you do can tell you a lot about someone. So, somewhat dated case now, Target was collecting huge amounts of data on what their customers purchased using loyalty cards, and they would use this to send targeted coupons to people's houses. And they were so good at this that they once sent a set of coupons for baby toys or something to a house because they knew that someone there was buying stuff that suggested they were pregnant. The only problem was that the person who was pregnant was a teenage daughter whose father didn't know this. And this was, in fact, how he found out, because he went into the store and got outraged about it, and then the daughter had to sheepishly sort of admit, hey, actually, Dad, they got this right. It's not some algorithmic error. So there really is a lot of data in payments. Right? So this is a real threat. And of course, things change in the course of years. New things come up. And so if you've been following the news recently, you've also seen Venmo. Right? Venmo had a public feed of every payment you made, public by default. And when this became well known, we started to see guides to how to stalk people on it. Right? And this is not okay, right? It's sort of done tongue-in-cheek. It's a kind of funny thing with a lighthearted photo on it. But this is, make no mistake, completely creepy and something that will happen with blockchains if we saw real-world usage. Right? And of course, as I said, interesting things have happened in the past week. Right? There is, of course, nothing else needs to be said here. There were some people from Facebook at this conference. I'm sorry, I love Mark, he's a perfect guy. So the reality of the matter is that, cryptocurrency is Twitter for your bank account. It's a little imprecise, it's a little snarky. It's more accurate to say it's a tracking cookie in real life, right? It tracks your daily life and exposes it, again, to anybody. Your creepy ex-girlfriend or boyfriend, your business competitors, everybody, right? And so what do we do about this? What are the defenses? Well, starting point is we have to understand that in a world of AI, social credit systems, and targeted ads, plausible deniability is not a plausible defense. Right? It is not enough to try to build a system where your goal is to be able to stand up in court and say, Your Honor, you can't prove it's me with 100% certainty. Right? That's not how the world works. And a machine learning algorithm doesn't care if there's a 1% chance it's wrong or even a 20% chance it's wrong. It's still going to tell someone something meaningful about your life. For that matter, if you're really trying to run like the next version of the Silk Road or something, you probably don't want to stake your life and freedom on the fact that if you get to court, you could say, oh, you can't prove it was me, because at the point that they've started investigating you, you've already lost. Right? So this is just not a good threat model. I don't know what people were thinking when they went at this. And another thing that I really did not expect to have to be standing up here on stage and making clear in 2019 is that pseudonymity is not a valid defense. Right? We keep seeing this come up time and again. Right? Facebook is in the business of making this claim these days. Right? And the claim is akin to saying that if the phone company posted all of your call records on a billboard in Times Square in New York, that there wouldn't be a privacy problem because they didn't post your name with it. All they have there is a record with an opaque pseudonymous identifier, a 10-digit phone number from the from and a 10-digit phone number to who you're calling. Right? This doesn't work. You can't build a system this way, and yet we keep, repeating these mistakes. Right? And so again, cryptocurrency is Twitter for your bank account. All of this data is exposed publicly to everybody, and the fact that it's pseudonymous doesn't change this. It doesn't really give you any defenses. Right? You've still got these problems. So what do we do about it for real, right? Well, in order to do that, we need to understand what's actually in a cryptocurrency transaction when it's broadcast, right? One thing that's in there is your IP address, maybe, depending on how you're using it. The payment amount is usually exposed. And the main thing is the transaction graph, which is who paid who. So if Alice pays Bob, who then pays Charlie, you are going to see a sequence of transactions that correspond to exactly that. And you'll be able to tell the structure of it, right? So if we have this, what do we do about it? Right? Well, the thing is that privacy here is not even intuitive, right? It's easy enough to obscure your data to passive observers in some circumstances. Of course, Facebook didn't even go for this, so maybe I shouldn't be saying it's so easy. But even if you're not just dealing with passive observers, that's one thing, but you also need to worry about privacy from more active things. You need to worry about privacy from who you send payments to, right? We would like Target to not be able to track what I'm doing, right? And you also need to worry about privacy of who pays you, right? If you're a dissident who maintains an online presence and you're accepting donations, but you don't want your real identity to be known, because say you're a democracy activist in Hong Kong and having that identity be known these days is a really bad idea, you're depending on this. And so in these cases, hiding the transaction values is not enough. You need to hide the transaction graph, right? The information of who pays who and what's going on, right? And the important observation here is if you don't do that, right? If you just say we're not going to have names on it, it doesn't stop most of these attacks. For example, if Target is trying to build up a profile of you, they can build up a pretty good one even if they never know your name. They'll know all the things you've done, and they'll have this notion of you're pregnant, for example. They just might not know who you actually are until you do something innocuous such as, say, send a package to your house from their website, and then your entire notion of pseudonymity disappears. Right? So what do we do about this? Well, there are a set of privacy approaches, right? Bitcoin, the vanilla version, doesn't do anything. It exposes all this information publicly. There is another set of approaches, which are called decoy transaction-based systems, right? And these try to obscure the transaction graph, right? You pick, e.g., 5 decoy sources of a transaction, and you say, rather than my payment came from this specific thing, you say it came from a number of them. And these are systems like CoinJoin, Mimblewimble, as used in like Grin, Beam, Monero, right? And then there's another set of approaches, right? There's ZeroCoin and Zcash and things like that. And in these, we don't do decoys, we just remove the information completely. There is no transaction graph. And so the question you want to know is, how do these things compare, right? Is it a question of just, well, these both give good enough privacy, so we need to figure out which one is faster, which one has better cryptographic assumptions, which one doesn't require trusted setup? Or is it the case that they are, in fact, categorically different? Spoilers, for those of you who did not see my talk last year, turns out they are categorically different things. So in Bitcoin, again, when you make a payment, you identify exactly where it came from, right? So the merchant who you're paying sees all this information. In decoy-based systems, rather than identifying the exact payment you made, you pick a set of possible decoys. And so the merchant has some idea what's going on, but the idea is that he's confused, right? And so to summarize this in a picture, decoy-based systems are basically this. You're putting out a bunch of flack, a bunch of chaff, to sort of confuse people and have no idea what's going on. But this stuff works about as effectively as that, which is it's better than nothing, but if you've gotten to the point where someone's shooting missiles at you, you're going to have a bad day. So in contrast, in Zcash, we eliminate all of this information. So these are the approaches. How do they compare? And the real question is, are decoy-based systems private? We know Zcash is private if you use shielded to shielded transactions. By the way, it's a major problem that that's not used readily, but we're working on it. So are the decoy-based systems private, right? And so the first thing to realize here is that there is information when you receive a payment, if you're a merchant. You see this thing called a taint tree, which is the possible set of ancestor payments, right? So the merchant sees you were paying them with a Bitcoin, and it came from one of 3 possible origins. And each one of those possible origins had one of the possible origins, backwards in time ad infinitum, right? It builds out this large set. And this actually turns out to be the Achilles heel of these systems, because this works going backwards, and it also works going forwards. If you want to observe a payment, you can see these sort of possibilities of where it went. And it gets more and more fuzzy as time goes forwards or time goes back, but there's still information there, right? And so there are a set of attacks that you can use to sort of leverage this and cause issues. And I talked about these in depth, both in my talk last year and at a talk in DevCon, so I'm going to go over them briefly here. The first one is an overseer attack. So if you're a merchant and you're receiving payments, you can very easily link those repeated payments together to find out that the 10 people who are making purchases are actually 3 different people and find out which purchases were done by which. And you do this by leveraging the fact that when you pay someone, when someone pays you, they get back a change transaction. And with high probability, they're going to end up using that change transaction again when they interact with you. And the odds of that change transaction being selected as a decoy by some random other person are actually quite low. So this should tell you that decoy-based systems don't provide perfect privacy, but this attack may not be exactly easy to mount in practice. Similarly speaking, you can track repeated customer interactions by looking at common origins of your funds. So you have a bunch of different payments. They look completely unrelated, but it turns out you funded them all from the same transaction when you bought stuff on Coinbase, and then you can link them together. Again, this will tell you conceptually that there's something wrong, but it's not quite clear, if this is perfectly doable. The next attack, however, should scare you deeply, especially if you're an activist in Hong Kong right now and for some reason are accepting donations with one of these things. Because it turns out, in a flashlight attack, it's very easy to identify anonymous merchants, anonymous people receiving donations, right? So again, the scenario here is you're an activist, you're online, you have an account, pseudonymous Twitter account, and you're accepting donations, and then you're trying to, say, cash them out in a real exchange which has your real identity. And you might think, because it's a privacy-preserving currency, you're safe. But it turns out, if you're using a decoy-based one, it isn't, because all it takes for the authorities to identify who you are is to send you 5 or 10 small payments. And then what happens is you are going to dutifully go cash out these payments through this exchange that's controlled, right? If you're, say, Bob, this activist. And when you do this, this exchange can either themselves look at it, or if they've been corrupted or subpoenaed by someone, the party doing that can do it. They can look at the records of everybody who's cashed out, and they can look for people who had all of these sort of tracing payments in the Taint tree of transactions they cashed out. And the nature of this of decoy-based systems is that a lot of people are going to have picked one of those tainted payments as one of their possible decoys. So there'll be a bunch of people who might have cashed out one of these payments. There'll be less people who cashed out 2 of them, less people who cashed out 3. And by the time you get down to people who cashed out all 10 of them, like where each one of their payout payments has one of these decoys as a possible origin, it's going to be no one. It's just going to be you, and the government will have found their dissident, and you are going to be in a world of trouble, right? And so this is a really practical attack you can actually run today. Right? And so this is a serious problem, right? And so the sort of common ground for all of these attacks is that repeated interactions between a sender and a recipient are dangerous. And most privacy coins, specifically the decoy-based ones, break here. Right? So this was where I left you with last year. And an interesting thing has sort of come up more recently, at least I've started thinking about it, which is a larger problem. Forget even active attacks. There's just an issue with known decoy transactions. So exchanges and custodial wallets produced a large chunk of the transactions that are, for example, in Bitcoin. Blockchain.com accounts for some 25% of Bitcoin transactions. The remaining top 4 providers in total account for something in the order of 50% of them. And so the issue is, if you're picking decoys for making payments, they only work if there are people who can't tell whether that decoy transaction is actually yours or not. But if all of those came from, say, Coinbase, Coinbase knows that they're decoys. They know that they're fake, and so they can see your real transaction out of it very easily. Right? So this is a problem, because the reality of the matter is, for most of these payment ecosystems going forwards, we're going to have still this reality, right? Another problem is that attackers can actually flood the network with fake transactions. Right? One recent paper estimated it would take less than $2,000 to de-anonymize 50% of Monero users. I should point out that this paper is heavily disputed by the Monero community, and in fact, the paper probably got the details of this attack quite wrong. Right? The claim is that it might have taken orders of magnitude more money to do this. And that's probably true, but if you do the basic multiplication, turns out orders of magnitude more means that it costs what? $200,000 to de-anonymize 50% of Monero users for a year, or $20 million, right? These are problems for decoy-based systems, right, at whatever the value is, and so we need to have a discussion about that. And these kind of attacks are actually more concerning for things like Mimblewimble and Grin, which I will get to in a moment. So this is what this attack looks like graphically, right? You have what you thought was a bunch of decoys, and then it turns out that these are all known by, say, Coinbase, and so there isn't really anything you're hiding among here, right? You thought you're hiding in a giant forest of trees and no one can tell where you are, and then all of a sudden you find out that most of the trees aren't really there. This in particular is an issue that one would be aware of for Mimblewimble and Grin and Beam. This is something that changed between this year and last. These are a new approach that is launched recently, and these are still a decoy-based approach. The difference is that the decoys are sampled from the current in-flight transactions being gossiped through the networks. And the transaction size is still linear in the number of decoys, but there is a little bit of compression you can do. The interesting thing with Mimblewimble and its implementations of Grin and Beam is that the decoys and real transactions are aggregated together as the transactions flow throughout the network. And so this is actually really cool. It's some novel cryptography, but it does mean that it's easy to monitor these sort of in-mempool transactions and see when the decoys are picked, right? And so this is particularly a problem if nodes in the network aren't honest, which you should assume. And it really means, for those of you who are familiar with the protocol in detail, that cut-through transactions, which are really good for compressing the blockchain, don't do anything for privacy because your attackers are going to observe the transactions before they're compressed. The same attacks apply to Mimblewimble, right? The flashlight attack is just as easy to do as it is against decoy-based systems such as CryptoNote. And in fact, it's a little more problematic because in Mimblewimble, your decoys are picked from the current set of transactions that are currently running through the network. So if you want to mount a targeted attack to de-anonymize someone you know is making a payment at a particular time, you don't have to flood the network for a year. You just have to flood it for like 10 minutes. So it's cheaper. But there is an array of assumption here. With sufficient cover traffic and the right sampling logic, Mimblewimble might evolve into something with stronger privacy guarantees. But it likely requires you to do mini transactions and have a lot of churn on it. I don't really think this will scale to serious privacy. And so in conclusion, decoy-based systems aren't really private, right? You have a set of attacks that cause problems. And so the question is, well, we shouldn't use them. So what do we do? Well, I think you should use Zcash. Since a lot of you are here, you probably think that too. But Zcash isn't perfect. There are a lot of things that need to be fixed. One thing is scalability, right? So privacy solutions in general need to scale, and they need to scale in two ways. One of them is to provide meaningful levels of privacy. Decoy-based systems don't do this because the transactions get too big. And the second thing is they need to support large transaction volumes. And a thing that you may not have gotten from the two past talks on scaling is that actually Zcash is pretty good at this, right? So transactions are, with a little bit of improvement and some work, 1 millisecond amortized to verify, and that's nice enough. The transactions aren't that big, and you only need to make a single transaction for privacy. So that actually, if you could somehow magically scale consensus, would give you a pretty good starting point. But there are other things that we need to fix, right? We need to deal with a number of other problems. But for nearly all the other approaches that people are working on, these things aren't true, right? In order to get more privacy, your transactions have to get larger, right? In order to get more privacy, there have to be more and more decoy transactions on chain, which means you're actually eating up whatever your blockchain's throughput is with transactions that aren't real. And so this is another problem. So in sort of conclusion, though, this is not the end of the talk, right? You need to, when thinking about these things, beware of privacy theater, right? Typical arguments for privacies are we have all of these features, right? We have stealth addresses, we have ring signatures, we have cut throws, we have ZK snarks, VPNs, Tor. None of these features mean that you have privacy. They just mean that you have buzzwords, right? Like you really need to think about what's actually going on. What are the features hiding? What are they supposed to hide? Are they hiding everything that you actually need to cover? And the answer there is likely not, right? And then you have to think about how the system's actually going to be used to be safe. Are you expecting people to make repeated purchases from a merchant and stay private from the merchant? Are you expecting it to be safe that you can take payments from anybody, safe from the knowledge that they can't identify you when you cash out, right? These are also problems. And so, again, just to leave you with this point, right? Cryptocurrency is Twitter for your bank account, so you really have to be careful, right? And in order to be careful, we also have to work on other things. Right? Usability is a problem that we have thankfully in the last year made progress on. Zepio is really nice. We also still need to make progress on discouraging meaningless usage of Zcash and other cryptocurrencies, right? You can do these stupid things where you try to shapeshift money into Zcash and then immediately back out, and you get no privacy. You can easily do the same thing from transparent to shielded transactions. We still need a good solution for privacy on mobile, though we're making progress. And we can't require syncing the whole blockchain to get private payments. And with that, yeah, I'll open it up for questions, though I think I have 30 seconds.
Ian. Great job, thanks. So I think we were all disappointed when we saw Zuckbuck's PR announcement, no privacy. But I think several of us were also excited by the potential for Libra to provide mainstream adoption of crypto. Do you have any pragmatic advice for that team as to how they might minimize the privacy hazard with their plan? Whilst not falling afoul of regulators?
So I think minimally you have a moral obligation to be forthright about the level of privacy provided by a pseudonymous blockchain, right? It's fine if you think you can't sell regulators on privacy, that any whiff of privacy would cause us to fail. But then you need to be very honest with everybody that that means that you can't use the public chain for real transactions. You need to be prepared that when some eventuality happens where users actually have this happen, say because PayPal, who's notorious for shutting down merchants' accounts, shuts down a merchant's account, and they now have to go work on the public chain, or you're in some country where you can't do KYC, and there isn't a wallet provider, and those people end up using an on-chain wallet. You have to be very honest. You need to be able to tell these people, look, you're really doing something that's disastrous privacy-wise. And I really hope that that messaging becomes clear.
Thank you, great talk. How does using Shapeshift to come in and out of a, like let's say Zcash, compare with other things like CoinJoin?
So you can do both of those poorly. The issue with doing Shapeshift in and out, if you were to wait a while and be careful about the values, it might be okay. But what you can't do is put $3.59 in and 3 minutes later take out